In this video, we are going to be looking at some functions that we can use with strings. So earlier, I showed you the built-in len function. However, this len function is not only specific to strings. You can use them in lists, tuples, and so on. And so we are going to be seeing that in coming videos. So let's look at some of these functions that we can use with strings. So if you do something like this and use this dot notation, you are going to be seeing some of these functions that we can use, or more accurately, we call them methods. So you are going to learn more of that in object-oriented programming. But what you should know is that everything in Python is an object. And so these objects have functions that we call methods. So more accurately, we can call these methods. And we can access these methods with dot notation. So let's look at some of these in action. So the first method we'll be looking at is the upper method. So let's look at this. So we can print this. So let's use our Python 3 app.py, and on Windows it is Python app.py. So look at this. So it has successfully put everything in uppercase. So welcome to Bethel Coding Academy is all in uppercase. But one thing I want you to know is that this returns a new value. For example, we can store this in a variable like upper or uppercase, and then we print it as a new value and it still works. So look at this. So it means that if you print, we can still print greet itself. So look at this. So the greet is still printed, and then we still have the uppercase printed. So it returns a new value. But to make this simpler, I'm going to use this consistently. So I'm going to print throughout this video. But if you want, you can store it in a new variable. So that is upper method. So I'm going to duplicate this line of code, Option, Shift, and down arrow. And on Windows, it is Alt, Shift, and down arrow. So we have the lower method. So let's look at the lower method. So you can see everything is now in lowercase. Okay, so we also have the capitalized method. So look at this. Capitalize. So the first word is capitalized. So let's look at this. So look at this. So the first letter, more accurately, not the word. So the first letter is capitalized. So we also have the title method. So what it does is that it capitalizes every first letter of every word. So see this, welcome to Bethel Coding Academy. So it capitalizes every first letter of each word. So that is that on title. So we also have the strip method. So for example, and we use this very well in data analysis, in data cleaning. So look at this. I'm going to show you this. So let's assume we have extra spaces at the end and at the beginning of this string. So look at this. So let's print this. So look at this. You can see that the rest have these extra white spaces at the beginning. But this strip method strips off the extra white spaces at the beginning and at the end. So we also have the right strip. So if you look at the right strip, for example, if you have it just at the right side, or let's say genuinely want to leave the white spaces at the beginning, we just want to strip the end off. So you're going to see this. Actually, you might not be able to see this, but it strips the right space here. If you look at the left strip, that you can see it very clearly. So look at this. So look at the left strip. So it takes off this one. So this is the left strip. So it takes off the spaces on the left side of our string. So this is very clear now. So let's look at other methods. So there is a find method. So look at the find. For example, we want to find this com. So let's look at this string com. So we are going to see the position at which the com is. That is the index. So it is at 5. So if you count from here, so you are going to see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because indexing starts from 0 in Python. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we found this com here. Okay. So let's look at other methods. So I've duplicated this more than twice. So we can count the number of occurrence of a value. So let's count E. So we can see the number of occurrence of E. I'm going to comment this for now. So it occurs 5 times. Okay. So if you count, this is it. Okay. Let me comment this one out because it is 5, 5. So it might cause a little bit. So you can see this 5. So if you count the occurrence of E, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So it counts the number of occurrence of a character. So let's look at this. So we can see starts with. So let's look at starts with. That's another method that we have with strings. So for this example, I'm going to take off these white spaces. So, or let me take all this off so let's look at the starts with method. So we want to ascertain that this starts with this. So let's look at this. So let's print. So let's see that is true. So this is an expression. So an expression is a piece of code that returns a value. So it returns this true. So it is either true or false. If you say, for example, let me duplicate this now and say that it starts with academy, which is wrong because it ends with academy actually. So look at it, it says false because it didn't start with academy. So if there is ends with also, so I will use the ends with and we expect this to return true. Yeah, it is true because it ends with academy. So let's look at some other methods that we have. We also have some other interesting methods. So I'm going to create a new string. So I'm going to set it to so let's say Python C#, and then we have Java. So we have the split method. Look at this. So we can split them. So it returns a new list. Okay, so it returns. Okay, so let's print this. So look at this. So it returns a list of items. So it converts this string and then puts them in a list. And then it splits them with commas. So this is how we create items in list. You're going to see that in list. So let's look at a few more methods. So let me create a new, so let's see numbers. Let me create a new variable. So let me give this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can do something like numbers. I want to ascertain that these contain only digits. So we can say is digits. So and if you print this is also an expression because it returns a value. So if you print this is true because we only have digits here. Right? This is nice. So we also have this that is alpha. So for example, I can use this greet. So I can say greet dot is alpha. Is everything an alphabet? We are going to confirm that. So look at this. It says false. Why? Because we still have some extra white spaces here. So everything has to be an alphabet. So if I take off these extra white spaces, we are going to get true. So look at it. So it is true because everything here is an alphabet.